So this is where it brings in, the broader mobile commerce. I mean, Google Wallet was announced this week, sort of Google's attempt to, I think, maybe not prematurely, but try to accelerate that shift towards people thinking about digital commerce devices, digital transactional devices, and the smartphone as that type of payment.
Well, that's kind of funny because in Korea, South Korea, and Sweden, where's Nokia?
Finland.
I've been doing that for like ever, right? And you can do it in Germany and Denmark and all that, right? We're always the last. It's because we always have these giant silos that are oligopolies set up, and they're huge, and they're incredibly lumbering. They have a lot of momentum. Once they start moving in one direction, you can't turn it around.
It's not just that, though. I think it's also the North American consumer and their sort of propensity,
the last 40 years of giant industries.
But also their propensity or fantasy to personal liberty. That I think for a lot of people, certainly the feedback I've been getting from the Google Wallet stuff I did on CBC, was people are terrified of being tracked. People are terrified.
Well, that's great
of having that information. But I don't want to get into the popular sentiment. I'm more interested.
Well, that's very important.
I'm more interested though in the technology and the relationship between these types of mobile commerce applications that come from Google, that come from Visa in terms of their digital wallet, and how that compares to Bitcoin, and whether Bitcoin is going to be a disruptive force. That say if it starts, people on Twitter start using those same Bitcoin hashes for charity drives, for fundraising drives.
That'd be great.
As a way to get people interested in the currency.
That'd be awesome.
I mean, elaborate a bit on the type of disruption that could occur in terms of how it plays out against the broader, Google and so on attempts to achieve the same thing.
I think there's so many unknowns. It's just speculation that I see like 5 sci-fi novels. Even if you just think, if you turn off your typical kind of, how should I put it, your limiting kind of thoughts that you've been trained into thinking in the last 5 years of the way, or 10 years of what technology has done with our currency that we have now and the way that everything works. If you take away some of those barriers, right now they look huge and monolithic and never going to move, but we've seen technology change several times. So these things could change, and if you just imagine for a bit further along in the chain of thought, you can think of things where every transaction is monetized. And I'm talking about a personal transaction. I'm talking about community, which is that's kind of the scarier side. I don't think that the mainstream will probably worry about that because they haven't worried about these types of things.
Well, but let's take a tangent there. Empire Avenue, which is I don't know if you've taken the time to use it yourself. It's too bad Daniel wasn't able to join us today because he's been doing a lot of research on it. Empire Avenue is this social network that's been around for several months. I tried it last year. And it does exactly that. It's a stock market. It takes Twitter, the social graph from Twitter, the social graph from Facebook, and it monetizes it. So it gives a value to each person in terms of them being a stock. Your stock pays dividends for each Facebook and social media update that you make. And as a website, it actually is, if you look at cloud as one that's taking a more social science perspective of giving you a score based on your influence, based on your authority, what Empire Avenue is doing is actually allowing your friends to buy and sell you, to speculate on what your future value is going to be as a communicator, as someone, right, who's, go ahead.
I'm just laughing at that comment.
Yeah.
Well, and Empire Avenue's been getting a lot of press lately because, as well, I think they got at least 7-figure, if not 8-figure investment, because they are creating, certainly amongst the people who are into it, who are interested in that type of buying and selling of social influence, in the measurement, in the ability to quantify what other these aspects are. But what strikes me fascinating about Bitcoin is where all of this is still virtual, where all of this is still like Empire Avenue is fake money. Bitcoin
only usable on the site.
Yeah, only usable within Empire Avenue. Like only, it's a virtual currency limited to the virtual
sure
world.
Someone's got a market trading Empire Avenue.
So here's the question. Is Bitcoin the bridge? Is Bitcoin the currency that will unite virtual currencies? Is it the currency that will connect real world currencies backed by national governments with virtual currencies backed in virtual worlds? Because it's the one that people can trade and not have it tracked. Like, you don't know what the transaction is. You know the transaction takes place.
Yeah.
But there's no way to tell that you just traded Empire Avenue currency for US dollars, or you just traded Canadian dollars for, World of Warcraft dollars.
Right. I think that's where the friction against Bitcoin is going to come in several stages. And then the first one's going to be these markets that'll be traded. People are already getting caught trading Bitcoins for PayPal money, and PayPal is shutting them down. They've got an increasing number of staff that are dedicated to stopping this kind of thing. The reason for that is because PayPal is getting outside pressure. They are getting outside, and they realize it for themselves. If they want to continue to do online transactions and extract their 2.1 to 3% fee, which is their literal bread and butter, just like the credit card companies, they have to be in the good graces of the big banking and industry, normal economics or normal economy. If they fall afoul of that, they could see a lot of problems. And other outfits have, like Liberty Dollar, which is doing something not quite the same, but they got busted literally. FBI showed up at their door and took all their gear, kind of thing, and this guy's in court and he might go to jail. Governments don't like alternative currencies. You see, every government in the world has quite a lot of laws, and all the barter networks have very, very, very strict policies.
So, just for a moment, playing devil's advocate, could you see a scenario in which governments weren't threatened by Bitcoin, in which they saw it towards their benefit?
Yes, because of this tracking aspect of things, if they have enough listening devices all over the world, they can start seeing the minute and secret flows, which were previously not actually available to them, to see money flowing between large organizations. I mean, there's got to be huge drug dealers on Bitcoin, because you go on this site called Bitcoin Explorer and you can track coins. That's very, very boring. You see, 200-digit number A, which is actually compressed into base 58, so it looks like letters and numbers, like 1Y, lowercase b, c, 3d, 0, it's just long, had transferred 200,000 Bitcoins to 5BX9.
And what would that be in US dollars?
Right now, today, I didn't look at the rate today, but in the last 2 days it was 850. 850 USD times 200,000. That's $1.6 million trade. Now, it could have been one guy consolidating in his own accounts. That's easy. That's easy to think. Now, I was thinking, well, why is that not a transfer? Why don't we think of that as legitimate economic activity when you see all these transfers which people suspect?
Yeah, why do you assume that
it's like, well, geez, this guy transferred $200,000. Geez, that's kind of a lot of money. Well, number one, it's got to be like, who would put that much money into a system,
Bitcoins
right?
In the first place?
Black market, right? Now, who would trust someone enough to transfer that kind of money? I guess it's two very trustworthy people, or you trust yourself. That's what I was going to say. The reason you can transfer to yourself, we don't think is a big deal, is because there's no trust gap to bridge. And that's what Bitcoin has done with these computations. It has made a virtual currency that is generated by fiat. It has commodified the distrust between agents in the system. Now, most humans do that through other systems of friction and physical. Paper is another one, but now there's virtual and pseudonymous. It's not anonymous. I don't want to say it's anonymous. I want to say it's more pseudonymous.
Because it's still tied to a pseudonym.
Yeah, I mean, you can make as many as you want. When you have your Bitcoin wallet, you have an ID, you have an address, and people can send it. That's your unlocking key, and they can lock it with that key, and you can unlock it. You can have as many as you want, and it's actually a very good idea that you have one for every person you receive from. So when you get money to that account, you know who it came from, because it came to this account, not that one. So I have like 5 Bitcoin accounts, and they each have like a cent. And a friend he thought it was stupid and frustrating. He doesn't understand how currencies can be generated just by fiat without a government backing it. And of course, the answer to the conversation is, how does a government really back its currency? The answer now is bullets. It used to be gold, but that got, I think, taken apart in the 70s. And so he sent me all the Bitcoins he tried generating, which was, 1. So I have like 1 Bitcoin from him. I know I received it from him because it went to that address.
But hold on, what do you mean all the Bitcoins that he generated? He
generated 1 Bitcoin.
So do you earn money just by being part of the P2P system? You're contributing CPU cycles. You're contributing computational power. And in exchange for giving your computers time, do you then earn money as a result?
If you were joined to a pool, see, normally what you're doing is everybody's looking for the next lottery. There's an encrypted hash that goes out. Actually, I'm a little fuzzy on this because it is extraordinarily technical. But I still think that modern financial system that we have is more technical than that. And I don't actually understand it, but I still use Canadian dollars on the street. So people.
But in the case of existing financial systems, their complexity is trumped by their accessibility.
Right.
The fact
and the backing that.
The fact that you can get Canadian dollars anywhere, that anyone will accept it, that all banks will deal with it, is its power.
Right.
And it's the perceived value amongst all people, both of its accessibility and of its value, that makes it useful.
Is it always universally accessible? Let's take the USD. Is the USD always universally accessible? Can I always use USD to make a transaction?
In the US, yes.
Well, how about just, in the Western world, say to Europe?
But here's we're getting into transnational phenomena where you're transcending the nation state.
Well, that's part of the value of Bitcoin, right? Because it doesn't have any central government that's controlling it. So it's not tied to any one specific economy.
So it's invented for internet
Right.
transactions.
So what I'm going to say is, no one could pay WikiLeaks except for in bitcoins. And I wish I got into bitcoins back then. I almost looked at it deeply, and I kind of got distracted. And
because WikiLeaks has been cut off
of all other legitimate forms of funding. So that
Right.
makes it interesting. That means the governments are trying to show to their constituents that they're very powerful, and they're going to come down hard on someone who thwarts their interests. Meanwhile, when the person who's thwarting their interests is asking for some currency to support them, if you shut off the method of being able to pay them by the legitimate government's currencies, what are people going to do? They're going to use alternative currency. So the government damaged itself, in all governments, damaged themselves, and the credit card companies. Because now all those kids in Anonymous who are, want to rebel against the system are like, screw credit cards, I'm not going to use them, I'm just going to use Bitcoin. Especially because a lot of these kids are into video games. And it turns out that all of the graphics processors on these computers for video games are very, very good at cracking the keys. Normal CPUs are no longer specialized and tuned well enough to do this very narrow type of work. And actually, you don't even need very much RAM on the thing, so they actually don't run as hot as normal. They're just using the little processing unit. And they're much faster than CPUs, about 10 times faster for the money, and for the power, actually. Because there's capital cost, and a good graphics card can be anywhere from $300 to $900. And then there's the power cost. So actually now Bitcoin is somewhat tangentially or nominally tied to the cost of power, because as people generate them...
because you need electricity to use the currency. It's
Right,
not
'cause these-
printed on a piece of paper.
Right,
It's not
well-
an actual coin.
Well, I don't just mean that. I don't just mean, I can use a couple watts in my phone. It's very efficient to transfer Bitcoin, but to generate a Bitcoin, see, that's what the generation does of this computation. It bridges the trust gap of the fiat. Creating a currency by fiat, you have to have everybody agree that that new coin is worth one coin.
Right, and you have to regulate how new currency is introduced into the system.
Right, it's introduced by making it more and more difficult as the computation power of the network goes up. Sometimes it goes back down. As soon as the difficulty steps up one step, because it is a stepwise function.
Which, if an interesting analogy here, it's the same value of a social network, right? Like if you were someone on Twitter in the early days and you had a lot of followers, you might now be eclipsed by someone who came and used auto-follow programs to get themselves many
Right,
followers.
the guy who generated coins with the CPU.
Right, so that's why some startups will have controlled betas, will have controlled invites, because the value of the exclusivity, the value of who's there, has to be controlled by how they grow. Because if they grow too fast, then you get failure, then you get outage, and the value of a service as a whole diminishes.
Right. So the early adopters are very heavily rewarded in Bitcoin because they believed earlier on, because now I've heard about it, I've waited. I didn't look deeply enough into, alternative media or whatever. Didn't read Slashdot enough, or I get breathless enough about some new thing because I've seen too many of them go by that turned out to be really nothing, to jump into it early. But other people got paid for their early adoption because Bitcoin started out at like 1/10 of a cent. Now they're worth $8.50. Some guy back in June of last year was talking about how he had calculated some either social or technical, of course he's not going to tell, attack on the Bitcoin network. Now everybody thinks it's kind of bullshit because nothing's happened yet. People have guessed at what he might have been doing, but he managed to generate 75,000 Bitcoins by using a lot of different computational power, which was cheap enough at the time. And he had investors. He talked about investors on the message board. He had other people throw in money, so they had to get a bunch of computers running. They rented computers out at co-location facilities, etc., etc. He has 75,000. That's quite a lot of money now, if you just let it sit in the bank. Especially if you cashed out 2 weeks ago, it was $9.30. So it's like a real money market. Now the one thing is that as more and more coins are generated, right now we're in a little bit of a bubble because the media is just...
Because there's so much interest in it.
So much interest in it. And people think that the coin is always going to deflate because it gets more valuable, unlike our currency, which is inflation. And I don't know very much about economic theory, but I'm starting to read about it because it's so germane to this. And all of our societal or economics in Western societies are centered around inflationary currencies, which means we have to consume to maintain our economy. If you don't consume, then you have a problem. And that's why our economies are so terrified. Our economists are terrified of deflation because it turns the system on its head, and we're not geared for it. Now, you can have a deflationary currency. It just means when you run a company, it has to be really extremely solid and providing value worth a little bit more, definitely more than its cost almost at all points. It also means that people supposedly will save their money because it'll just get more valuable. But the problem is you can't do that forever. Just as much as in a recession, we always climb out of them.
Well, and all of this...
You need to spend money.
All of this is based upon a scarcity, right? And the scarcity in this case is that computational resource.
Right. It's constructed scarcity. I won't even say it's false because it's not false. Everybody knows the rate at which coins are going to come out, and they're going to end in 2030 something.
Because the peer-to-peer system means that even if you introduce stronger computers, even if more people
the whole system will
added
adjust.
more computers, it would scale
Yep.
so that it maintains
The
the.
difficult, the 50 coins every 10 minutes is, and so there's going to be 21 million coins in 2038. Now the coins are divisible down to a quadrillionth. So even if the value of a coin inflated to $1,000 or $10,000, you could still, everybody start talking about bit cents, or the guy who wrote the original papers, this guy named Satoshi. People refer to Satoshis instead of bitcoins, which is 100,000th of a bitcoin, which isn't really a useful currency right now because it's like a 100th of a cent. But you know, when that
But as it
inflates by,
scales.
yeah, if it inflates by 100 times, I don't think I think we're in a bubble right now, and I think when the bubble's finished, what will happen is it will no longer be feasible to compute this stuff at home. You will have to have. I've already seen people do. I used to work in cluster computing, building clusters for universities to compute, you know, protein folding and that kind of stuff. And we went through a lot of mistakes of building cooling systems and trying all this stuff. And I see these people doing it in their garages again, you know, like